Hello, class. I wanted to go over a few points about your lab reports. As I read through your introductions, many of you discussed wanting to make sure that you understood how to write the lab reports. So there's a couple of things that I first want to point out. In the news and announcements section for your class, there is an important announcement that I do want to stress, and that is called the Turnitin percentages on lab report grades. Because you are going to be turning in your lab reports in the Turnitin program, and it's going to give you a particular percentage. And that percentage has to do with how much of your report is plagiarized, okay? And so there are some things in a chemistry lab report that will be similar to other lab reports as far as the information in your charts for measurements, for certain calculations. And so because of that, generally, if it's less than 40%, generally, it's because of those similarities. But if your percentage is 40% or greater, this means that your paper is not written in your own words, and you may have copied or pasted information from other sources. So, this is considered plagiarism and is not tolerated at GMC. Okay. And so at this point, I would strongly suggest that you take the time and make sure that your paper is written in your own words and resubmit your assignment. As long as you resubmit your assignment with before the due date, which is always going to be Sunday at 11:55, there's no problem and you will not lose points. Okay. But if you don't resubmit, okay, and you keep it there, this is the breakdown of the points lost and the actions that will be taken. So if you receive between 40% and 80% in your turn-in lab, excuse me, report, this indicates there's a lot of copying and pasting information from your sources. Your lab's report, remember, should be in your own words, and there will be a 5-point deduction from your lab report with the warning for the first two offenses. Okay. Excuse me. After that, we will have to discuss further actions. If you receive between 81% and 90% on your turn-in lab report, this is an indication of plagiarism, and your first offense will be 10-point deduction with a warning. After that, we will discuss further actions. And then if you receive a 90% on your turn-in report, this is an indication of plagiarism, and your first offense will be a 0 for this assignment with a warning. After that, we will discuss further action. And keep in mind that plagiarism is not only copying your lab report from another source, but it is also using generated AI to actually write your lab report. Okay, so that is also a form of plagiarism. And so that will receive the following deductions as well. So if you have any questions on plagiarism, the use of artificial intelligence or AI, the use of ChatGPT and all the other AI generated sources, please let me know. Okay. Another thing that I want to point out that will be helpful in your lab report writing is on your main page for Moodle, there is a link, and here we go, with the lab report instructions. Okay. And so I do want to go over this. I went over this in the live session, but I want to make sure that you fully understand what is entailed in this lab report. So up here is the general format. You're going to name your file with your last name underscore and the lab number. So for this one, it's week 1, so it's lab 1. And then you want your file type to either be a Word document or a PDF. You want the length to be 2 to 3 pages of the written test. So if we include the title page, which should be separate, and the reference page, which should also be a separate page, then that is 4 to 5 pages in length for your lab report. The font should be Times New Roman. It should be a 12-point size. It should be double spaced, 1-inch margin all around. The orientation should be portrait. We want the style to be APA style, so that is your style for your references. No quotations are allowed. If you have information from another source, then you want to make sure that you reference that source. And then you would say, you would put the information in your own words, but you would give reference to that information for your references. For every lab report, there should be at least one reference for each lab report. If the only thing that you use to write the lab is the template that you get from the Moodle website, then you need to reference that template from the Moodle website. So if you are not sure on how to reference something from a website, I do have some links for APA referencing and how to do APA style referencing. Also, there are some library links for APA referencing, and that would be in the student resource page. And I'll show you links for that in a moment. Then the sections. So you should have the title page. Your title page is one separate page, nothing but the title, your name, the course and section number, and the date. The date that you put here would be the date that the lab report is due. So you would put tomorrow's date or Sunday's date, which would be June the 9th for week 1. Then your introduction, that should start on your second page. You want to title that section Introduction, and then you want to put in your information. So I'm going to go through this. So while the laboratory background for each experiment lists some rudimentary information, this will not be enough to complete your introduction. So you find additional sources that discuss the key concept of the laboratory. This is where you start to get your extra resources. You want to make sure you document that on the reference page. You want to clearly state your hypothesis near the end of this section. And so if you have questions about how to write a hypothesis, let me know. Be careful not to plagiarize or quote unnecessarily, right? And then your methods and materials. So some of the information can be obtained from the laboratory instructions. Identify the equipment used within the lab. Do not discuss computer setup or the keyboard brand, etc. You want to provide enough detail such that an outside reader can clearly identify all items used in the laboratory, okay? And make sure that you title that section, right? Then the results. This section requires you give clear description of the data that was collected and how it was analyzed. Present any graphics generated from the data, such as charts and tables, and introduce them. Don't just stick them in your report. Okay, so in this results section, any type of measurements that you make in this lab, you want to make sure that you document those measurements in the table. So if you measured mass, if you measured volume, you want to put that in a table. Anytime you need to do a graph, that would go in the results section. Anytime you need to do calculations, you want to make sure that that goes in the results section. You want to provide labels for all your figures and reference them in your writing. And so you want to write some information in that results section and refer to the table for any types of information that you actually measured within that lab. okay? So very important that you include that. You also want to title this results, okay? The next section is your discussion section. This is where you evaluate your results, put them in a broader framework of research and other experiments. Do the results support your original hypothesis? So you want to answer these questions while writing. Who cares? What does it mean? Why should I be excited by these findings? How do the results affect the theory you discussed in the introduction? Do they confirm or disagree? Did I satisfy the primary objective of the lab? What aspect of the experimental environment could have confounded the results? Is there anything you do differently the next time you were setting up the experiment? Okay, so anything that went wrong, you would put in the discussion section. All right. Everything that went right, you put in the discussion section. Okay. And so all of that is in that 2 to 3 pages of your written work. The last page is going to be your references. They must be in APA format and on a separate page. And so this is all the references that you use. Each lab report should have references. And so if all you use was the information on for the directions for the lab report, make sure that you reference those directions, okay? So here's some tips for writing a report. So write the report like a research paper. You are not simply presenting your findings, but instead you are working to prepare a professional document to give insight into your experimental efforts. Your audience is a person who has never been in the lab. Use descriptive but concise language. You will need a large amount of time to complete your report, so start working on it as soon as possible. Always provide the units for every measure unless instructed otherwise. Do not use first person. Do not use rhetorical questions. And as in all academic writing, make sure you cite all sources and give proper references. Okay. One thing I do want to add to this, when you're doing calculations, make sure that you're always rounding to the correct number of significant figures. Okay. All right. And so another source here on your webpage, okay, a couple of things. One is your grading rubric. Okay, so this is how you're graded on your lab report. And so your goal, of course, is to get all perfect scores on each of these sections. So read through here. I won't read through this during this video, but make sure you read through how you're going to be graded. Okay, so you'll have a heads up if you're including what needs to be included in your lab report. And then there's a link here to the Writing Center. And this is of the University of North Carolina, but it gives really good tips on writing scientific reports. And so it does a breakdown of the introductions, the methods, results, and discussions, how to draft your different sections. So it goes through in great detail about the purpose, the hypothesis, all these information that you'll need for your introduction, background, and previous research, organization of this section, then the methods and materials. How do you write that? How do you structure the methods and the materials, the results section? What information do you have in the results section? And it even gives you examples how to formulate your table, how you're going to title your table. Okay. Then it gives you a couple examples of tables. Okay. So that you can see how to set them up and also how you want to title your tables. Okay. If you're including pictures in your actual report. Some students will write out their calculations on a separate piece of paper and add it as a figure. You are welcome to do this. Just make sure that the picture that you add of your calculations, that you have it as a very clear easily visible picture. It's not fuzzy, it's not it's able to upload into your document perfectly. Okay, and then your discussion, how you explain whether your data supports your hypothesis. Okay, all of that information, and then your works cited. All right. So go through here. If you have questions or concerns, let me know. Okay. All right. And so when you are turning it in, you want to make sure that you're going to turn it in to the turn it in for your laboratory. Okay. You're going to click on that and then you're going to submit your lab report. After you submit it, it's going to give you a percentage. Okay. And if you are not under the 40%, then you want to go back through and make sure that your lab report is your own writing. Okay. That none of that lab report is part of someone else's work. Also, I did a virtual lab tutorial and a lab tutorial, week one lab tutorial. Okay. The first one is on how to do the virtual lab. The second one is actually on the lab itself. And so if you have questions, let me know. I am going to, but you'll see it. This video will be posted in the news and announcements section. But if you have any questions as you're doing your lab reports, please let me know. Have a great rest of your weekend.